my Mazda RX-7 is slow. Which is why today we're gonna make it a whole lot faster. What the hell? I did not expect that. When this car came out in the late 80s, it must have been an absolute blast to drive, and honestly, with its lightweight and around 180 to 200 horsepower, it still holds up pretty well until this day. But every time I drive it, I cannot help but think it could be a little faster. So let's change that today with this. Because MaxPeedingRods came up to me and they asked me if I wanted to test a turbo from their brand new street performance lineup. And naturally, I said yes. I picked out a turbo which will hopefully fit the RX-7 because, well, just look at the size of this thing compared to my head. This is ginormous. So to give the RX-7 some more power, we are essentially doing a turbo swap, for which we will need a fuel cut dispenser, intake, couplers, heat shielding and an O2 sensor, a wideband O2 sensor, some adapters and an external wastegate, oil lines for the turbo, a new downpipe, and of course, the turbo itself. I'm gonna explain why we need all of that stuff and what all of that stuff does later, but for now we first need to dress the turbo, which is basically just a fancy term for assembling most of the stuff on the turbo itself outside the car before installing it into the car. And just like that, the turbo is fully dressed now, and it's gotten a whole lot heavier because right now, as you can see, we got basically almost everything on there. We got our wastegate back here, our nice little adapter, the oil drain, and the turbo beanie, which is gonna act as a heat shield. Anyways, we got this done. Let's rip out the old turbo. A very important thing to remember with turbo swaps is that when you decide to put a bigger turbo into your car, this naturally means that your engine will now inhale more air and thus will need more fuel. Hence why I'm now upgrading my secondary fuel injectors for some bigger ones to compensate for the upgraded turbo. Alright, intake manifold is off, and this just gave us access to our beautiful pink little engine down here. We need to get to this area right here because obviously we will need to change these two injectors out for bigger ones. Currently these are 550cc injectors. I'm gonna go for 720cc secondary injectors, which we will need because obviously more air means we need more fuel. And while I'm wrenching away in the background, let me just quickly give a shout out to MaxPeedingRods for sending this turbo over to test out. If you're interested in getting a new turbo for your car yourself, make sure to head over to their website, link is in the description below, and get yourself a sweet deal. Next up, the fuel cut dispenser. This basically just fools the ECU into thinking that we're actually running stock boost while we're actually not, preventing a fuel cut to the rear rotor of the engine. That's just heavy. That's literally... What I wanted to say is that old thing is heavier than you might think. But we got everything out. Oh my god, that was really not as easy as I expected, but we finally got it out, and I'm really happy that this thing is finally out of the car because this is just super nasty. There's also some surface rust right here. It's not a big deal, but it just looks so ugly. Also, look at the size difference. That's really crazy. I'm really curious how this will perform compared to this one. But I would say, before we actually fit it permanently, I really want to put it in and see if this thing even fits. All right. Oh, wait. Oil lines. Oh, it's heavy. Okay. I really don't know if this thing will fit. Like, seriously, that's going to be so tight. There's no way. There's no way. Oh my god. But like, anyways, I got it roughly in place. Oh, damn, this thing is huge. I think it's gonna fit actually perfectly, but the problem is on the exhaust manifold there are studs that I have to bolt the turbo onto. As you can see right here, it's just hung up on the turbo beanie on the ABS module. It will not be that close once the turbo is actually mounted, but to get it into place, it's just, there's literally no room. One day passed and I've done a whole lot of work off camera. For one, I have decided to leave the turbo in because really it was a pain in the butt to get that one in. But now, as you can tell, it's in and it's mounted properly. Now the only thing that's left to do is connect everything up, build an intake, build a little pipe that goes from here to the intercooler, and yes, we're using the stock intercooler for now. I'll explain the whole idea of the turbo swap in a second, but first we are in dire need of a new downpipe since my old one doesn't fit anymore due to a different turbo location. This will connect the turbo to the rest of the exhaust. Now, initially the problem with that is that it's actually pretty tight up there, which is why I thought it would be a good idea to model the downpipe before I get it welded up permanently. I really wanted to fab it up and just model it with this flexible wire. That didn't work very well because, as you can tell, it's way too flexible, and if I give that to a machine shop or to someone who can actually weld the downpipe, they're like 100% gonna mess it up because I gave them a bad template, which is why I resorted to this. And yeah, it's actually already a completely fabbed up, oh my god, fabbed up downpipe. And the good thing is I finally got a welding machine, which means that I could actually weld this downpipe completely by myself. It doesn't look great, but it should hold up pretty well. There are two things, however, which I haven't sorted out yet. First one being the two bungs for the O2 sensors, and second, the wastegate return. Now, before we go any further, I think it's very important that I explain to you the overall concept of this turbo swap, because this is actually not your standard turbo swap where you just swap out the turbo, like the manifold, whatever, put a link ECU or a Haltech in and you're good to go. Because this right here is a little more tricky. The main reason being that I'm actually gonna run the stock ECU for now, and usually this can get pretty dangerous pretty quickly. Because you just gotta imagine you're putting a bigger turbo in, which means that the car is actually getting more air. And the main issue is that the stock ECU doesn't see that the car is actually getting more air. And naturally it cannot compensate for that with more fuel. But for that I got a bunch of tricks up my sleeve. First one being that I actually installed a upgraded fuel pump in the back, so we got more than enough fuel coming from the back to the engine. Also we got an adjustable FPR or fuel pressure regulator. But of course the most important thing is the fuel cut diffuser. This is basically just fooling pressure sensor and telling it, hey, we're actually just running stock boost levels, you do not need to cut fuel to the rear rotor. Because what happens is that if this pressure sensor detects that the turbo is actually producing more boost than it should, it will cut the fuel to the rear rotor of the engine, leading to all sorts of problems, running lean, and this can actually blow your engine. So for that we got the fuel cut diffuser, FPR, upgraded fuel pump, as well as of course some upgraded secondary injectors which I've installed previously. These are 750cc, and as an extra safety measure I've also added a wideband gauge with a wideband going directly to the downpipe, just to be 100% on the safe side, and that we can always keep track of the AFR values to make sure this engine doesn't go lean and go boom. Now, to give us a little more control over the AFR values, I've also installed a Greddy ProFac boost controller. This is an electronic fully adjustable boost controller which I've already wired in right there in the corner. So let's say we're running about 0.4 bar of boost and the AFRs are sitting right around like 9 or something. That would actually be pretty rich. We don't want that, we want the optimal AFR values. So what I can do with this thing is basically up the boost pressure just a tiny bit to make sure our AFR values are within spec and we're neither running too lean nor too rich. And as if all of that would not already be enough, I've also installed an IAT gauge just to keep track of the intake temperatures and to be extra safe with this baby. And if we head underneath the car, on top of that, I've also installed a 0.5 bar wastegate spring into this external wastegate. Because the stock boost levels actually sit right around 0.4 bar, I went slightly above that because that's actually totally fine because rotaries run rich with the stock injectors anyways. And as I said previously, we're also going to run this Bosch wideband O2 sensor in addition to our stock O2 sensor, which is going to send the values to the stock ECU. So guys, if that's not safe, I don't know what is. And before you leave a mean comment, this was actually common practice back in the days when people started turbo swapping their RX-7s back in the late 80s, early 90s. And I think we can all agree that back then they probably didn't install that many safety measures into their cars to prevent it from blowing up. Alright guys, everything's hooked up, the turbo is in, wastegate is connected, all of the lines, bits and bobs are on, wideband O2 sensor and the stock O2 sensor are also in. And now all that's left to do is basically just bleed the coolant and take it for a rip. Alright everyone, we are at a closed off track right now to test drive the RX-7 with the big turbo. And to get an idea of how much power this thing makes, I got my dad with me in his 350Z, which is proven to have 320 horsepower to the wheel. And we're gonna do a little third gear pull to see how the RX-7 stacks up. Alright guys, there he is. Let's see who's faster. Let's get up to speed real quick. 2, 1. What the hell, I did not expect that. So I guess that proves that, well, at least in third gear, the RX-7 has at least 320 horsepower to the wheel, which is awesome. Dude, I didn't expect that. We were like literally side by side for the entire time. That's crazy. But of course, the main purpose of this test drive was not only to race my dad and to find out how much power the RX-7 actually makes, but most importantly, to actually dial in the air-fuel ratios and just to check if everything's safe. And honestly, the AFR values looked awesome the entire time. I made sure to check them while I was doing the pull. And for the entire pull, they were literally around like 11 to 12, which is perfect. For a rotary, I guess for a normal car it's a little rich, but for a rotary, that's totally fine. That's where they should be, so I'm more than happy with the outcome. I'm gonna enjoy the rest of the drive with my dad now, but I'll see you back at the shop.